It's always great when you can show someone new the view through your telescope. Last night, Will and Steve came around. Now, Will has never looked through a telescope before. Steve was given one many years ago, but simply doesn't get along with it. So they came around, they were having a look through some eyepieces, and I thought, hang on a second, why don't we put these 25mm eyepieces to the test and see if they can actually tell the difference between the cheapest variant, the mid-range one, and the most expensive. Now, the three eyepieces we're looking at today are the 25mm Plursul that comes with your telescope with a 50-degree apparent field of view. Next up from that is an eyepiece that comes in at around about the £90 mark, or $100 US, and that is the Celestron XL LX. Bit of a mouthful, I know. Now that has an apparent field of view of 60 degrees, so about 10 degrees more than the Plursul, and provides just a little bit more comfort. Beyond that, the price rises very steeply, and we move to a TeleVue Panoptic 24mm, widely regarded as a cult favourite and coming in at about the £355 mark, which is on loan to me from a friend who's offered to sell it to me. Stick around until the end of the video and I'll let you know whether I'm going to buy it from him. So when you get a brand new visual telescope, quite often it will come with a 25mm eyepiece like a Plursul. Now, those eyepieces tend to feel like you're looking through a straw because they don't have a very wide, what's called apparent field of view. How much of the circle can you actually see? So because that circle feels narrow, you get that straw-like feeling when you're looking through it.
How just yummy that can be.
Which can feel a little bit constricting.
Great.
Plursul, 25 Plursul.
Great.
The more comfortable the eyepiece is to look through. I hope that's fucking recording. Well, first it was important to let the guys just get accustomed to the telescope and actually looking through eyepieces on this telescope. So, for a start, I slewed them to Jupiter, which was nice and high in the sky, very bright, and they were having a look at that through a 17mm Beta Planetarium and then the 10mm Celestron Luminos here. And you know what it's like. The first time someone looks through an eyepiece, they need to get their head into the right position. They need to get used to the fact that there's eye relief. You know, what is the eye relief of the particular piece they're looking through? And it can all be a little bit overwhelming. So what we did was we moved to a few different targets with a few different eyepieces and let them just get accustomed to looking through an eyepiece and a telescope for the first time. I didn't just throw them in the deep end. I got them to have a look through each of the eyepieces first on Vega, knowing what each eyepiece was, and I explained the differences to them, and then it was time to put them to the test. It comes for free with the telescope, 25mm Plursul with a 50-degree apparent field of view and an eye relief of God knows what, and who cares. Next, we have the Celestron XL LX. What a mouthful, because XL LX just sounds awkward to me. However, that's what they've named it. Now, again, a 25mm eyepiece, albeit with a wider apparent field of view of 60 degrees compared to the 25mm Plursul that comes with the scope.
We become what we think about.
Premium coatings for very good light transmission through the eyepiece. It's not cheap. Used market, somewhere around $250 to $280. Now, my friend has astigmatism, unfortunately, and he's offered to sell this to me because he's using this eyepiece on the far right, which I'll get to in a minute. Let's talk about that for a moment, because if you wear glasses, eyepieces can be a little bit difficult. And it's said that a comfortable eye relief is somewhere around the 20mm mark, maybe down to 16mm. At 15mm eye relief, it becomes a little bit iffy. And that's where the TeleVue eye relief is, 15mm. The Panoptic is widely said to be not a fantastic eyepiece for eyeglass wearers unless you buy a further attachment to put in front of the eyepiece, which is called a TeleVue dioptrics. And that then corrects for astigmatism and allows you to enjoy the eyepiece without having to actually wear your glasses at all. So I'll be giving you my impressions tonight as someone who doesn't have to wear. The apparent field of view on the Panoptic is 68 degrees, so a full 18 degrees more than the Plursul. Now, eyepieces are an incredibly personal thing. What works for one person isn't going to work for another person. As I've already touched on, if you're wearing glasses, already that pushes you up to longer eye relief eyepieces and cuts out a large portion of what might be usable for you. If you're not wearing glasses, it then comes down to what do you actually enjoy? Some people really enjoy the narrow field of view of Plursuls, anything say up to about the 60-degree mark, and are happy with just having a very sharp image in the central part of the eyepiece where they're actually using their cone cells. Other people really enjoy being able to move their head around side to side, as odd as this looks, and my neighbors think I'm absolutely crazy doing that if they're looking at me right now, but moving your head to the side so that you're then coming down with your glance at an angle and getting a sharp view of things all the way out to the edge of the eyepiece. And that is where eyepieces like the TeleVue, with their superior optics and edge of field sharpness and brightness, will give you that better experience and a little bit more flexibility in how you interact with the eyepiece itself. In terms of seating position, I alternate between 3 positions when I'm doing this, and the least favorable is standing, because as you know, when you stand and you're trying to look at something, your body sort of wavers around a little bit, and it can be difficult to keep the target perfectly still. Far better, I find, is if you've got the eyepiece set up at the right height, then you can get a stool and you sit on the stool with the back closer to the mount, and you can hold on to that, and then you find you get a very stable position at the eyepiece. Sometimes, however, if the mount is slewed all the way to zenith, then what you'll notice is that the eyepiece is now too far down. Possibly I could move the seat back like this and try and get to it like that, but that's not really going to work for me. So a lower chair like this, and then that's again perfect height for me. Now, they do sell special astronomy chairs that have an adjusting seat rest that you can literally just take out and put at different heights. I haven't bought one of those yet, so this is what I'm doing. After a while, it was time to put them to the test. So let's talk about how well they actually did. In a nutshell, really well. Now, when Will had his first blind view, as in he didn't know he was looking through the 25mm stock Plursul, he thought it was really good. And I have to agree with him there. I also thought that it was remarkably sharp in the center. He did feel a little bit constricted in his field of view, which became even more apparent to him once he actually tried the wider eyepieces. Steve, however, got it bang on straight away and said, no, that's the cheap one. I think that's the cheap one. So Steve, with maybe having looked through a telescope before, could perceive the quality there. And I got the feeling that he was feeling a little bit constricted and also wasn't having the best experience out of the edge of the Plursul in terms of field sharpness right at the outer reaches of the eyepiece. Okay, so next up, while the guys were still on Vega as a target, we popped on the Celestron XL LX, which has an apparent field of view of 60 degrees, so a whole 10 degrees more than the stock eyepiece, and better coatings, so better sharpness, better reflectivity. Now, while we're on this point, I do need to mention something. This telescope here that I own has had the diagonal replaced with a Celestron dielectric mirror diagonal, which is brighter and has higher contrast than the one that comes with the telescope. Now, that costs about £150 to do, but I would highly recommend that you do that very early on in the piece, because the difference in brightness and contrast is really noticeable. And that was definitely one upgrade that I don't think you should skimp out on. When you think about it, if you start investing in high-end eyepieces, but still have the cheap stock prism diagonal that came with your SE type telescope or your SCT, you're putting something mediocre in front of very good glass, and that generally doesn't work very well. Get the best thing you can to put between your decent optics and your good eyepieces, and you'll be good to go. So as soon as the LX went on, Will got it bang on. He said, yeah, this is better. I feel more comfortable with this. I feel like I can see more, which he could because of that increased apparent field of view. And he thought that it was a little bit sharper. Steve also said, okay, this is a better eyepiece than the first one. All the things were sharper, a little bit more pushed out from the center, and I have to agree with him on that point. So a 1 point to both of the guys. They both detected that the Celestron XL-LX was better than the 25mm Flirt. Now we moved on to the big daddy of the bunch, the cult favorite, the 24mm TeleVue Panoptic. Both of them got this bang on, said it was the best eyepiece out of the lot and felt very spacious, and I have to agree with them on that point. 68 degrees in comparison to the 60 and the 50 apparent field of view definitely feels spacious. But more than that, the thing that they both remarked on, which I also agree with, is the edge of field sharpness on the TeleVue Panoptic is just absolutely stellar. Also, it felt to all three of us that it was easier to focus and bring those stars into pinpoint sharpness. 24mm Panoptic is extremely rewarding for taking in a large swathe of space in pin sharp clarity edge to edge, and really rewards that technique I was talking about earlier, where you look down through the eyepiece at an angle and then pan yourself around to take in what's around the center. Now, you know, with some certain targets like the Ring Nebula, for example, where you have to use a technique like averted gaze, having that flexibility from a really sharp edge-to-edge eyepiece to be able to maneuver your gaze at the outer portions of the field of view and then soak up the detail in the central portion where the object is with your rod cells is a really valuable thing. So you're getting the best of both worlds there. You're getting sharp detail in the stars around the field of view of the eyepiece, but you're also allowing your rod cells to soak up the detail from the very faint nebulosity in the center of the frame. Ring Nebula is extremely interesting because if you look directly at it, it disappears. And both Will and Steve remarked on that. If they tried to look directly at it in the center of the eyepiece, boom, it was gone. It wasn't until they actually used that averted gaze technique, then all of a sudden the donut appeared back for them. So now we're going to move on to a talking point with the Beta Morpheus 76 degree here. And this is where you're starting to approach spacewalk territory, I would say. The 76 degrees is approaching the actual limits of how wide your eye can see. It definitely feels remarkably spacious. Not only that, but you are pushed in more than the 24 and 25 mil. So you are getting that sensation of being engaged more with the image. And on certain targets, that works really well. Particularly on planetary targets where perhaps the seeing isn't going to support you being at 10 mil, for example. Like last night, the seeing wasn't great. Even with Jupiter nearly at opposition and very high in the sky, I think it was approaching 50 degrees last night. The 17 mil really came into its own there, above the 24 and 25 mil, for example.